There's a snowman outside that won't melt. Written by Lapis Lazuli. In the way that snowmen often appear, it was simply there one morning. Anonymous art donated by one of the numerous neighborhood kids after a night of quiet, heavy snowfall roughly 2 months ago. The snowballs of its body are pocked and lumpy. Its elm branch arms disproportionate. One faces directly out like a compass needle. The other is bent in the middle, like a gunslinger ready to draw. The face and buttons are irregular stones from the park landscaping. Instead of a hat, branches from a nearby evergreen tree are embedded in the scalp to create the semblance of hair. A knobby carrot serves as a nose, and a ratty black and yellow striped scarf is wrapped about the neck. It would likely be the most endearing snowman on the block, if not for two disturbing qualities. First is the mouth. The snow-pressed stones of the mouth are arranged into a perfect frown, giving the snowman a pained, miserable appearance. The second is the snowman stares directly into my house from the park across the street, ensuring that I have to make eye contact with it every morning when I open the blinds. The first few times I pulled the blinds open to the dour snowman, I found it laugh-worthy, in a ridiculous sort of way. After a couple of weeks, I had begun to resent it. After a month, I wanted it gone. But somehow, the snowman persisted. No rambunctious kids ever ran off with its striped scarf. No cackling teens kicked its head off. No late-season squirrel stole away its lumpy carrot nose. In fact, I never witnessed any creature come within arm's reach of the thing. The snowman was like a statue from a long-dead religion, obscure but still sacred enough to threaten penalty for irreverence. I was unwilling to lower myself to a place petty enough to destroy a child's sculpture. Perhaps even more than that, I didn't want to admit how much the face of the thing bothered me. But after a month and a half of patient resentment, I got my wish. An unseasonal heat spike hit my town one Sunday, sending most of our winter wonderland into the sewer drains. I remember glancing at the snowman sitting in the sun of the balmy 50-degree winter day and thinking cheerily, soon. That Monday, I woke up early to prep my son for his first day of school. It was actually the first day his district was returning to in-class learning for the school year. As the two of us stepped into the cool morning darkness, I immediately spotted, by the pale yellow of a street lamp, that the snowman had not melted. Not even a little. Strewn around it on the park grass were the last patches of snow that had survived Sunday's heat. But the snowman was as good as new. Its unaltered, dismal face triggered a wave of horror in me as my brain processed the impossibility. But I maintained my composure, not wanting to startle my overly impressionable 7-year-old. Nevertheless, I hurried us out of view of the snowman and waited until we were well past it before I took Jake's hand to cross the street. The bus was already rolling up to the corner, and Jake tugged impatiently at me to run and join the friends that he had been missing. I waylaid him just long enough to get a quick first day of school photo with my phone, a tradition that had been delayed by the pandemic. Then I hugged him, wished him a peppy goodbye, and watched the door panels flatten shut as he disappeared into the bowels of the bus. After it had started to roll away, I turned back towards the quiet, lamp-lit park, ready to meet my newest neighbor. Fear prickled just beneath my skin when I approached the snowman. I dismissed the feeling as silly. An evolutionary holdover from an era where unknown things were best left be. But I was not afraid, I convinced myself. I was merely curious, in a perfectly reasonable way, as to how a snowman almost my height had survived a full day in the sun without becoming a runny statuette. The sculpture's asymmetrical stone eyes, eerily lit by the pale lamplight, unnerved me. Without understanding where it came from, I caught the sudden and vivid idea of destroying the snowman was out of question. I was only there to visit, to study, and so I began. I scraped a line of snow off with a fingertip. It was perfectly cool and ordinary, melting as I rubbed my fingers together. The sticks and rocks were ordinary sticks and rocks. The carrot was an ordinary, albeit well-preserved carrot. Where the snow had melted away near the base of the snowman, I found several burn marks that formed various lines scorched into the grass. I also found the frozen corpse of a garter snake that appeared to have been stepped on, its head bent like a bracket. It was strange, but not insightful. The only real fruit of my investigation was finding the initials RDS written in Sharpie on one end of the scarf. Perhaps my nerves were getting the better of me from being too close to it for so long. But at last I resigned myself to the conclusion that the snowman's survival had simply been some atmospheric anomaly. I shrugged my paranormal fears away in favor of the thought that it would have to melt sometime. Satisfied, I broke from its dour gaze and returned home, ready to forget about it and start the workday. I finished work later that afternoon, roughly 30 minutes before the bus was due to drop Jake off. I settled onto the couch and opened my photos to see how his first day of school picture had turned out. The app offered one of those smart photo albums, ingeniously entitled, "Catching the Bus." Sufficiently endeared, I opened it. I was treated to a stylistic procession of first day of school photos from my camera roll. Most were of Carrie, my older daughter, who was spending the week at her mother's house. Last year's photo featured her and Jake together, surrounded by a cadre of neighborhood kids. It was the only one of its kind, as Carrie had started middle school this year. The slideshow concluded with that morning's photo of Jake, smiling forcefully in the dark. For a moment, I savored the private, bitter joy of a reminiscing parent. Then, in a wild snap of epiphany, I swiped back to the photo of Carrie and Jake. I held my finger to the screen to freeze the slideshow, and I expanded the image to focus on a particular kid in the background. He had dark, sunken eyes, a lean face, and a shock of black hair. Wrapped around his neck and tucked into his oversized parka was a ratty black and yellow striped scarf. It was pixelated, but I was certain that it was the same scarf that now adorned the snowman. The child was staring off into the distance, a look of sullen reverie on his face. My fixation was interrupted by Jake, who threw open the living room door and thundered in, eager to relieve himself from the burdens of first grade. After snacks had been eaten, homework assignments reviewed, and television watched, I attempted to inconspicuously check what he knew about the boy in the photo. Zooming in on the child's pale face, I lowered the volume on the TV and asked Jake if he knew who it was. "Yes, that's Rowan. He lives at the end of the street. He's my friend." Jake spoke matter-of-factly, as if the very notion that I hadn't known this was preposterous. "How come you've never hung out with Rowan after school or talked about him? I didn't know you two were friends," I said. The question gave Jake pause, and he tore himself away from the episode of Scooby-Doo to properly explain. "We weren't friends like that. Rowan doesn't really like people. He gets into fights and other kids say that he's creepy. I think I'm the only one who talks to him. He says I'm the only friend he's had that he didn't have to make himself." This revelation concerned me, but I was touched by my son's empathy. I put on my best commending parent voice and replied, "That's great, Jake. I'm proud of you for taking the initiative to be so nice to someone who has a hard time making friends. Did you see Rowan at school today?" "Nope," he replied, once again fixated on the cartoon. "Rowan stopped showing up to online class too, like a long time ago. I haven't seen him." I wasn't sure what constituted a long time ago in the mind of a 7-year-old, but his answer was worrisome. Leaving Jake preoccupied with Scooby and the gang, I went to the living room to look out at the snowman, as if somehow it might suddenly hold the answers. I shaded my eyes against the living room window to peer into the shadowy darkness of early evening, and my breath caught. The snowman had moved. I was sure of it. Positive. It had been about 10 feet back from the sidewalk that circumnavigated the park block across the street. Now it was directly next to the sidewalk, closer than ever, still staring straight into the house, straight at me. Even worse, the stones of its eyes appeared different. They had turned slightly downwards, making the face of the snowman even more morose, more expressive. A kind of instinctive anger flooded me. I'd hit my breaking point for the inexplicable. I shoved my feet into shoes and grabbed a plastic broom, determined to turn the snowman back into the powder it had been rolled from. I crossed the street in adrenaline-fueled strides, closing the distance in an instant. Face to face, I studied the thing and waited for something to happen. For it to speak, to attack me, to move, anything. But the snowman remained still and ordinary, staring from inches away with its depressed eyes and bitter frown. Amnesty over, I pulled the broom back like a baseball bat, aiming to take its head off. And then I stopped. I remembered what Jake had said only a few minutes earlier, that Rowan lived at the end of the street. I paused, my broom poised to strike, and I reconsidered the snowman. One arm pointed straight as a compass needle, directly to the end of the street, right at Rowan's house. This snowman had been staring through the window of the one boy who was friends with its maker, pointing to his home, its face frozen in distress. A horrifying idea soaked through me like a bath of cold water as my mind raced. Rowan stopped showing up to online class too, like a long time ago. I haven't seen him. Back inside, I threw on a jacket and proper boots. I grabbed my phone and keys and joined Jake, who was just reaching the part of the episode where a member of the gang does the big reveal. "Hey kiddo, I'm gonna step out for a few minutes and go and check with Rowan's parents. I want you to just hang out. If it gets to bedtime and I haven't come back, call Mom, okay?" Jake seemed perplexed, but put up no argument. Television time was being mysteriously extended, and he didn't want to look a gift horse in the mouth. "Okay, Dad. Be back soon, though." The house at the end of the street was a peeling blue rambler, buried beneath an undisturbed quilt of snow. In fact, the snow had built up so high on the roof and walkways that even Sunday's heat hadn't cleared more than an inch or two of it away. The windows were dark, but the total lack of tire tracks or footprints signaled that either the inhabitants had not left for some time, or they had abandoned it a while ago. I was grimly determined to discover which. I knocked with false confidence, worried for a moment that Jake had gotten the house wrong. After a minute of nothing, I knocked again. More silence. I counted my breaths, then tried a third time while speaking as authoritatively as I could muster. "This is Rich from down the street. Respectfully, if I don't hear anything, I'm going to call the police for a wellness check, just to be safe." In the silence that followed, I prayed that the scene wouldn't end up with me looking like a psycho. Then there was a creaking. I heard a ponderous shuffle within, the slide of the deadbolt, and then the door groaned open about a foot. Peering out at me was a short woman who looked like the living embodiment of the expression "one foot in the grave." Her gray streaked hair was greasy and frazzled, her tired eyes shelved by impossibly dark bags. She answered the door in a dirty sweatsuit splotched with stains. Even through the crack in the door, the house stank like death. "I'm sorry," she said with no apology in her tone. "What can I do for you?" I stole a glance over the top of her into the dim house. Stacks of miscellaneous junk and piles of garbage covered every flat surface. My body tensed up defensively as the stink of the place assailed me. "I'm sorry to bother you, ma'am. My son Jake is in the same class as Rowan. Jake was worried because he hadn't seen Rowan in a while, and he asked if I would come and check on him for him. How are you guys doing?" I flashed my best parent-to-parent smile, and I hoped that my lie would put her at ease. Her expression told me that it did not. Rowan's not here," she said urgently, her eyes flooded with distress. I'm sorry, you'll have to check back at some other time. Goodbye." She moved to shut the door, but just as she tensed to slam it, a child's voice spoke up from within the house behind her. "Who is it, Mother?" The woman froze, her eyes locked with mine. I couldn't read her expression, but my best guess was something between panic and shock. "Oh, is that Rowan?" I asked as innocently as I could. "Do you mind if I speak to him for a moment?" To my surprise, the woman stepped back, practically drifted back into the house, disappearing from my view. The door opened a foot wider, and she was replaced by a young boy with dark eyes and hair, who stared at me suspiciously. I crouched to his level and tried to inconspicuously scan his body for any signs of trauma or abuse. He was thin and dirty, dressed in black long johns and a grungy gray t-shirt. But aside from his stink and wild, unwashed hair, he appeared healthy. He stared at me with intense, dark eyes before asking, "What do you want?" "Hi, I'm Jake's dad. He told me his friend Rowan had been missing for a while and wanted to know if he's okay." I finished with my best friendly dad wink, hoping to put him at ease. "Rowan is not okay," he said easily, then grinned a wild, much too wide grin. "Why isn't Rowan okay?" I asked, disconcerted. Rowan stared at me intently, but ignored the question. "She wasn't lying, you know. Rowan isn't here. He doesn't get to live here anymore." As he spoke, his dark eyes turned darker, storm clouds rolling over an evening sky. What do you mean?" I asked, my voice faltering. The stench had grown unbearable, but I was transfixed by his ever-darkening eyes, like prey paralyzed beneath the gaze of a jungle snake. When Rowan next spoke, his voice came to me as two voices. One a child's voice, the other an unnatural, hollow whisper just beneath it, like something lurking low in his throat was imitating his speech. He should never have called upon me. He should never have spoken my name. At this, the thing that looked like Rowan indulged in a short, wretched laugh. He thought that it was okay, that he could call upon me since he was lonely. The last word was drawn out mockingly. Jake's comment from earlier echoed in my head. He says I'm the only friend that he's had that he didn't have to make himself. The creature's eyes, now darker than the void, darker than emptiness itself, engulfed me. Now, leave this place. Never return here. I have to go check on Mother. And then, with no prompting, the door slammed shut. I was frozen there in the evening silence, crouched in the position that I had been left in, my brain reeling. I staggered from the porch, vomited into the snow, and then lurched back home, my body shaking uncontrollably with every step. When I got home, I held Jake for a long time, then made him promise to stay away from Rowan's house no matter what. And then I went to the living room window. Even today, the Snowman is out there, staring into our home, mournful, desperate, beseeching. The weather has issued fickle threats of the coming spring, growing warmer, then colder, then warmer again. Still, the Snowman hasn't melted. But I know that time is running out. I know I don't have long. So I pray that the days stay cool, that winter's chill lingers. At least long enough for me to get Rowan's body back from the thing at the end of the street that stole it.